Is the book of Job really about suffering? Well, maybe. But the strongest theme of the heart of the book, the dialogues, is friendship. It's the story of how friends fail to help their closest friend in his darkest hour, while all the time thinking they are sorting him out. And one of the book of Job's unexpected gifts is that it reveals the secret of a person's spiritual resilience and the principles of effective friendship. Friends can be so powerful, but they can also lead us so astray, even from the best intentions. What I take, more than anything else from the book of Job, is the absolute value of really taking your own experience of suffering seriously. Not minimizing it, not denying it, but accepting it and going on from there with God. There's an old saying well known to all the propagandists of the world. If everybody around you keeps saying you're a donkey, sooner or later you're going to look around for your tail. Now Job has 3 friends, or 4 if you count Elihu, and they've called him a donkey for a very long time, but never once does he start looking for his tail. He never once starts hunting his sin. He maintains, as long as I live, while I have breath from God, I will never concede that you are right. I will defend my integrity until I die. That's pretty amazing resilience when you think of actually what they're asking him to do. They're trying to get him to invent sins so that he will then receive the prosperity of God. What kind of friends are they? They can't handle where he is, so they're going to squeeze him into their understanding of suffering. But Job knows he hasn't sinned, at least not in the way they are accusing him of. In any case, we'll see that he does repent of something when we look at the speeches of God, but he's not repenting of the sins they're trying to point out, because he hasn't committed them. It is terribly important that we don't try to rewrite our experience of suffering when others come by and try to help us, because often that's what they're trying to do. I had a great spiritual mentor who always said, 9 times out of 10, when people come to me, I tell them what their problem is. They tragically underestimate the importance of their own spiritual experience of God. They think everybody else has got a better experience than they. Or we might think the pastor has got it all together, but we don't. Maybe some of us are too busy coveting other people's experience. This can happen even with the persecuted believers. I remember when I was setting out to write a book about the persecuted church, a famous pastor in China took me aside and he said, "Ron, for every deliverance story you will hear, there are 100 endurance stories. Make sure you get the balance right when you come to tell our story." So the book was called Faith That Endures. I wish we could hear from more people at the front of church who simply have endured, rather than the delivery brigade. I got delivered from this, I got delivered from that. I'd rather hear about the majority of people that have endured through the grace of God, because that's where the emphasis in Job is. Job is a man who endures. That's where the resilience comes to the Christian and to the persecuted church. They have a gritty, authentic testimony with God that gets them through the tough times, and they look back to it and they say, well, that was real, so I'm sticking with it, and it will be real again, even if I can't feel any of it now. Job is amazing in his capacity to stay resilient in the light of all this misleading advice. But there's something else about learning how to be a good friend. We're all going to have friends that go through hard times and maybe have a faith crisis in the middle of it. How do we help them, given the experience of Job? I think there are 3 steps to being a good friend, and we can see them in the book. First of all, just listen. Now, Job's friends do that at the beginning of the book. They sit down with him for 7 days. That's good. They just empathize with him in silence. In Open Doors, we often say the greatest gift we can bring to a persecuted Christian is just our presence. Brother Andrew says that persecuted Christians frequently said to him, "Your being here is worth more than 20 sermons or 100 books." The second is, don't fix or judge. That's where the friends start to go wrong. Just accept the experience of the one who is suffering. It's very sad how many Christians suffer in churches that do not allow them to have their experience of suffering. One couple I met recently had a child with schizophrenia. The church prayed and prayed for healing, and then, over time, when healing didn't happen, the couple were accused of lacking faith, and it became impossible for them to remain in the church at all. Now, the ostracism wasn't official, but it was palpable, mainly because they were in a church culture that just couldn't handle those whom God chose not to heal. Finally, thirdly, help that friend go to God with whatever is concerning them. I once had a pastor friend at seminary who got himself into trouble. It wasn't that he'd had a Job kind of experience. There had been some financial mismanagement. He went and told a childhood friend and said, "Listen, I've got into a bit of trouble over this." And the friend said, "I'm so disappointed in you. That's terrible." And he cut off all contact with him. Then he came to me. I hadn't a clue what to do or say, but I remember him saying something to me that really made me think. He said, "I can't go to God about this. I'm too ashamed. I can't go to God about it." Now, when someone is saying something like that, something's terribly wrong. They're like a Pharisee, people who think they're so worthy that God would just love them because of their worthiness. And if you're unworthy, then God can't love you. It's the other way round with God. It's broken people, it's empty people, it's sinful people, it's sad people. They're the ones that God welcomes. So what's a godly friend? Maybe the book of Job teaches us that the highest form of friendship is to get next to the person who is suffering and help them go to God. We need help, even in a church context. It seems that in every church culture there's a way of understanding how God should act and how he shouldn't act. And sometimes these parameters on God's actions can be very, very narrow. Job's friends just couldn't go where Job was. They had a blind spot. God couldn't allow an innocent man to suffer. They just couldn't go there. Their theology was not expansive enough to take it in. Even in persecuted contexts, I've seen this also. And remember, we're not setting up the persecuted church as the perfect example of how to do the Christian life. All we're saying is that their story demands our attention because it's so real and so full of insight if we can let ourselves be taken out of our own comfort zone. There was a poor pastor in Iran who was arrested and sent to prison. What often happens in jail in Iran is that the police humiliate you through homosexual rape. And this pastor was raped repeatedly, and he even pretended to give up his faith. When he came back to his church, it all came out. But the church shunned him. They said, "God wouldn't let you get to that point. God wouldn't stand by and let that abuse happen to you. Something's wrong with you," they said. And that made his suffering all the worse. But I remember Alexander Solzhenitsyn talking about this. He was a great Russian Christian and dissident who had suffered in the Gulag camps during the communist era. And he famously said, everybody has their breaking point. Every torturer knows where that is. Some push you past it, some don't. But it's up to them, not you. They know you cannot resist beyond that breaking point. But back in Iran, the congregation was so sure that the people of God didn't have a breaking point. So they failed to hear the heart and ministry of a broken pastor. They rejected him when he probably would have had a far more powerful ministry, and in fact does, among a different group now, because he's taken his humiliation to God and has received a new love and commitment and strength in the pastoring work that he does. God always has a more generous theology than we have. I think we always have to accept that. But it's hard to get pushed out of our comfort zone. God gets out ahead of the church. That's his right. But sometimes the church isn't very good at catching up. That's our shame. I saw a wonderful t-shirt the other day that said, "Blessed are the cracked, for they let in the light." The heat of affliction sometimes cracks our clay. So we have to learn to love the cracked and broken saint, accompany them, honor them, pray with them. For one day, you and I will be one of them too, if we are not already.